Look at Japan right now. The government owes more than 230% of its entire economy. The yen just hit its lowest level in 40 years. And the government's response? Spend more, borrow more, print more. Now look at America. The debt-to-GDP ratio sits at roughly 120%. Interest payments alone are approaching $1 trillion a year. The population is aging. The fiscal pressures are mounting. And the playbook being used in Japan right now? It's the same one that could be coming here next. This is Crash Historian, where history uncovers the hidden forces shaping money, power, and the modern world. If you enjoy documentaries that uncover the hidden mechanics behind economics and history, consider subscribing. And let me know what city you're watching from. I'm always curious to see how far these stories travel. Here's the full story they don't teach you in school. What's happening in Japan should terrify everyone holding dollars. In late June 2026, Prime Minister Sanai Takaichi unveiled a staggering plan, a 370 trillion yen investment program spanning 15 years. That's roughly $2.3 trillion. The goal? Stimulate growth, boost defense, and supercharge technology. The market responded immediately. The yen plunged to 162.80 to the dollar. That's a 40-year low. Japan has become the world's weakest currency, as one analyst put it. But here's the part that should worry you. Japan already has the highest debt-to-GDP ratio in the developed world. Not just high, the highest. At 230 to 240% of GDP, Japan's government debt has reached 1,343 trillion yen, roughly $8.6 trillion. And yet, the government is spending more. This is fiscal insanity. And it's being enabled by the Bank of Japan. Retention hook. But here's what nobody's telling you. This same pattern is unfolding in America. And the mechanism is almost identical. So how does Japan get away with this? Financial repression. The Bank of Japan has spent years artificially suppressing bond yields. From 2016 to 2024, they ran a policy called yield curve control, capping 10-year government bond yields near zero. Even now, with yields rising, the central bank's options are limited. Every time the government spends more, the Bank of Japan is pressured to keep borrowing costs low. Because if yields rise, debt servicing costs explode. And Japan can't afford that. Deutsche Bank recently warned that Japan may have to shift its focus from supporting the yen toward controlling yields. They said the government will need to find room to spend while maintaining fiscal sustainability. That's a polite way of saying they'll suppress interest rates to finance debt. Sound familiar? The United States did exactly this after World War II. The Federal Reserve capped bond yields at 2.5%. Inflation ran at 6%. Negative real returns for 30 years. That's how America erased its debt. Now Japan is doing the same thing. And the U.S. is next. Retention hook. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Japan's strategy may be America's only option. The similarities between Japan and the United States are striking. In the early 2000s, Japan's national debt surpassed 100% of GDP. Today, it's above 230%. The United States is at roughly 120%. But the trajectory is identical. Both countries face the same fundamental problems: aging populations, rising healthcare costs, and political paralysis around tax increases or spending cuts. One academic analysis found that the fiscal challenges now faced by the United States bear striking similarities to those Japan encountered several decades ago. They concluded that Japan's experience may potentially provide lessons as the United States navigates its own fiscal challenges. But there's a critical difference. Japan has a captive investor base. Japanese institutions, pension funds, insurance companies, banks are required to hold government debt. They have few alternatives. That's why Japan can suppress yields and get away with it. The United States doesn't have that luxury. Roughly 30% of U.S. debt is held by foreign governments: Japan, China, and others. They're under no obligation to accept negative real returns. They can sell treasuries and buy gold or other currencies. If those foreign investors begin reducing their holdings in a meaningful way, the Treasury faces an impossible choice: offer higher interest rates, which raises borrowing costs, or rely more heavily on the Federal Reserve to buy debt, which weakens the dollar. And here's what nobody's telling you. Japan is already showing us exactly how this ends. Behind every yen that falls, every government bond that gets suppressed, and every debt that gets inflated away, there are real people paying the price. In Japan, inflation is eroding household purchasing power. The yen is so weak that imported food costs are soaring. Ordinary Japanese families are watching their savings shrink while the government spends trillions on semiconductor subsidies and defense contracts. In the United States, the same pattern is emerging. Inflation has already eroded 20% of purchasing power since 2020. Wages haven't kept pace. The wealth gap is widening. And when governments suppress interest rates to finance debt, savers are the ones who pay the price. Pension funds, insurance companies, ordinary people with retirement accounts. They're forced to accept negative real returns because the alternative is worse. The burden moves quietly, slowly, and almost invisibly from the government's balance sheet to the people and institutions holding that currency. Not all at once, but one inflation report, one bond auction, and 1 year at a time. There's a pattern in history that's written in debt and currency. Britain did it after the Napoleonic Wars. Interest rates kept artificially low. Inflation allowed to run. Debt burden quietly eroded. France did it. Devaluation after devaluation. The franc lost value. The debt burden lightened. The people holding francs paid the price. The United States did it after World War II. The Federal Reserve capped bond yields. Inflation ran ahead of interest rates. Debt erased without being repaid. Germany tried it after World War I, but they went too far. Hyperinflation. Wheelbarrows of cash. Complete currency collapse. Now Japan is doing it, and the United States is following. The underlying mechanism never changes. Governments facing overwhelming debt find it politically easier to reduce the value of money than to reduce the debt itself. The loans remain. The promises remain. What changes is the purchasing power of the currency used to repay them. The question is not whether this will happen in America. It's whether it will work or whether it will end in collapse. So where does that leave us? Right now. Today. History doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. And this rhyme is written in debt and currency. The dollars in your bank account. The value of your savings. The price of everything you buy. Japan already did this. They suppressed interest rates. They inflated away debt. They transferred the burden from the government to the people. And now, the same strategy is being deployed in America. The Federal Reserve is walking a tightrope. Rates high enough to fight inflation, but not so high that government borrowing becomes unaffordable. That narrow space, where inflation runs slightly above interest rates, is precisely the environment in which your savings quietly lose value. The best-case scenario is that the strategy works, like it did for America after World War II. The worst-case scenario is that it triggers a crisis, like it did for Germany after World War I. This didn't happen in Japan because of a single policy mistake. It happened because the country was addicted to debt. It's not happening in America because of a single policy mistake. It's happening because the addiction is spreading. The debt hasn't disappeared, but the political will to address it has. And the mechanism that governments have relied on for 2 centuries, reducing the value of money, may be the only tool left. The only real solution, the only thing that actually changes this pattern, is to address the debt, to grow the economy faster than the debt grows, to make hard choices about spending and taxes. But that's not what governments do. They take the quiet path, the one that transfers the burden to you. This is Crash Historian. Every week, we uncover the hidden forces shaping money, power, and the modern world. If you want to understand the real story behind the headlines, consider subscribing. Because the more you know about the past, the better you can protect your future. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and never forget, history doesn't just repeat, it teaches.